Hello everyone, we're back with part 2 of our space field series, and this is the last part where we'll go briefly over the making of the ship. It'll just be a time lapse though, because I didn't want this to be a modeling tutorial, and then I'll get back into it with the final preparations of our scene and the rendering and compositing of our light shafts. Alright, let's get into it. Alright, so since this isn't a modeling tutorial, I'm just going to time lapse this bit, but I will do a voiceover of it. So I'm just starting with a simple cube, going into edit mode and just stretching it out. And this is going to be the main section of our ship. So I'm just beveling it on the edges by one level to turn it into an octagon sort of shape. Then I'm duplicating that piece to create a bigger section, scaling it up, adding another cube. And as you can see, I'm doing all this in edit mode. I'm not making separate objects of it. You can do that if you like, it's up to you. It is more non-destructive to use separate pieces, but I'm just doing it all in edit mode to just keep it simple, because it's not a complex model and I'm doing it quickly. But as you can see, I do separate this bit, and I'm adding 2 edge loops and extruding the middle loop inwards to create some detail for the cockpit. And yeah, it's just up to you where you want to separate objects and use separate objects, because sometimes it's just simpler to create a completely separate object for a certain piece. But I find for some bits I don't mind just duplicating within the same object. But it's up to you, whatever feels best for the job. Right, I'm creating a back section, beveling again to create an octagon, then an extrusion in the center, or an inset with eye. Eye is a really good tool. You press I and it insets the face. Yeah, I did it just then. Then I've extruded all those inset faces inwards. And a really important thing is, if you want to know how I'm extruding the faces, multiple faces along different axes together in separate directions, I'm actually using a pivot point. And the pivot modes are actually very important. I'd say the pivot modes and learning to manipulate where the object origin and where the cursor is are probably the main, some of the most important modeling techniques here. Just so you can manipulate objects and transform them in different ways. As you can see, I've created a separate object with the wing here, because it's going to be both a wing and our back thruster, which is why I thinned it out at the front. And I've just created an interesting shape, thinning it at the front and then extruding a bit at the front alongside the cockpit. And I'm just curving the wing out, and I've left this thick triangular shape at the back because it's going to be like our 2 side thrusters. Yeah, you can see I'm extruding inwards so that I can create that back thruster hole. And that's just an interesting way to sort of create a body of the ship and like turn it into a set of wings and thrusters. There we go. I'm adding sort of a grill to these back thrusters by adding 3 cubes, stretching them out into bars. Now I'm just manipulating the vertices individually so that I can bring them in so they're not poking out. And I'm just matching them up, rotating them to the right angle and pulling them up. And I add 2 edge loops to them just to pull them out and curve them so that it's more interesting. There we go. And then, like with the wings earlier, I duplicate it and I scale it on the negative x-axis, -1. That way I can flip it over. But another important thing to remember is to set your transforms or reset your transforms with Control A, and you reset all the transforms so that you can scale on the negative axis to duplicate or like flip it or mirror it without it having issues. Now I'm using the V to rip these edges from each other. It's just grab an edge loop, press V to rip it. That way I've created all these separate edge loops to create this back thruster. And I'm adding a solidify modifier, which allows me to create thickness without having to model all that myself. Just turns all those flat edge loops into thick bands. Now I'm just extruding individual faces on the cockpit to create the windows. And if you double tap I, which is the inset button, you can create more, or you can inset faces separately rather than together. I'm just adding a couple edge loops on the wings now, and that allows me to create some more detail by extruding in. But I had a problem where I didn't want to extrude the back, so I added that edge loop so that I could just select all the way up until just before the back, and as you can see, I've created this line along the wing just before the back section. I'm doing it again with another couple edge loops, and that's just to create some more detail, a couple of cool inset lines along my wings. Now, how detailed you go with this is up to you. It's not going to be very close to the camera, so I'm probably doing a little more than I need to, but I was having fun with it and I wanted to just try out some different modeling techniques. Now I'm adding sort of a ring, just typical of like a sort of space station-y ship. Not that this is that, but I thought it was an interesting detail, so I just added that. And now I'm actually adding hard edges to all my models, which is why I'm selecting edges and then right-clicking and clicking the hard edge button from the drop-down. And that just highlights them blue and sets them to hard. Because when you right-click a model, you can set it to either flat or smooth shading. But when it's smooth shading, everything turns out smooth. So to individually set what faces I want to still shade hard, I'm selecting them individually and then just clicking hard edge. Now I'm adding a couple edge loops to just round out those back thrusters. And yeah, now I've got all my hard edges, so that even though we're using smooth shading, we've got those hard edges without having to subdivide our model, because it's going to be far away, so we don't need to use anything like subdivision. Alright, and it's just all about adding simple shapes. Like, it's very simple shapes. You can see I'm using a lot of cubes, cylinders, and just going from there, adding bevels with Control B, or edge loops with Control R. And yeah, it's all about edge loops, beveling, and just manipulating the model with extrusions and insets to create all these different shapes. We're creating this section now for like the main back engine section. Just create these two interesting shapes coming out from the ship to break up the silhouette. And I'm duplicating it, creating a couple bars. And then what I do is I actually rotate around the origin, which I've set to be in the center of the ship. That way I can rotate it around, and you see I duplicate it all around the four faces of the main section. And now I've just hidden the top one, and I'm adding a new detail, which is sort of like a sort of grill, where I get this simple shape that I beveled and then duplicate it. And Shift R repeats the last action. That's how I quickly duplicated all those, by just moving it and then pressing Shift R to repeat that duplicate and movement. And then I've done the same thing where I've just rotated it first 45 degrees and then 90 to get it all around that engine section on the four sides. And now I'm just insetting this section by double tapping I to inset all the faces separately rather than the whole edge loop, and I extrude them all in on their own axis. And that's again using that pivot mode, which is called individual origins. It basically treats each face with its own origin rather than moving it together, and that's how I extrude on all those different angles at the same time. Now I'm just adjusting this and creating this sort of curvature, and then connecting it back up to the body, because it needs to be connected somehow. Yeah, just with this extrusion in the middle, and just adding those hard edges where they need to be so that I don't get this shading issue. Again, another bridge to connect it to my ship. And yeah, it's just all about extrusions, insets, and loop cuts. And then, of course, like I said, one of the most important things is like learning to manipulate where the origin and cursor are of your objects, and like learning to like rotate around them for different uses, and all the pivot modes. But yeah, I know I'm going very quickly. I didn't want this to be a modeling tutorial. Maybe I might do something in the future that goes into more detail, where I just do a modeling tutorial. But yeah, I just wanted to do a quick time lapse for this because it's a small portion of the render. And here what I'm doing is I'm creating a separate panel, which I'm quickly going to duplicate all over my ship just to create a quick surface detail, because the main section of our ship is now complete, but it's just all simple models and it's very flat looking. So that's why we're quickly making these smaller, very simple models or panels, which I'm going to put over the surface of my ship later. So just with some very simple detail, all the same techniques we've been using, duplicating, insetting, extruding, and yeah, I want to like have some pipes going to this middle section, so I just extrude that along, then extrude it down into the hole. There we go. And yeah, just these interesting sort of mechanical components. It's not photorealistic, like, because I'm just modeling it off the top of my head, but it's just a very cool exercise in modeling to just quickly create some simple detail quickly. It's not realistic, it's not accurate. It's just very quick and fun to do. So just creating more detail here, and just making each panel a little bit different from the last one, so that we have multiple different panels, so that we're not just duplicating the same thing over our ship. But you'll see what I do with them later when I put them on the ship. And just creating a sort of pipe section that connects to that main bit of that panel. Now I'm just fixing the bits that are poking through the bottom. Yeah, I decided for this bulb bit I wanted to like have some like sort of short antenna sticking out of it, so I modeled this simple rectangular prism and then slant it, and then like just add a couple loop cuts and scale the middle loop in to like sort of create a bulb that's just very low poly, and then I duplicate and rotate it around, which you just saw, to create those 4 little antenna. And now I'm moving them around, and that's where I made a mistake. What I did was I scaled my panel, which I shouldn't have done, because what we're about to do is we're actually about to just making a quick panel just here, just a quick sort of grill panel with that grill pattern, those simple beveled cubes. There we go. That's the 4th panel we've made, and that's just giving us all these panels to put over our ship. And now what I do is with Alt-D you can duplicate, but Alt-D is a special kind of duplicate. It actually instances the object, and instancing basically means that the object will use the same data as the duplicate or the original. So you can manipulate one model and the exact same changes will occur on the other model. They're sort of the same model, but just another version. They're not treated separately. And that just allows us to quickly add detail. And if we want to make changes, we can make changes to one panel and it will occur on all the others. It's a pretty good technique because it also is less resource consuming. Like if you have objects using separate data for each object, then it's more expensive than to just instance it when you want the same object distributed around. And there we go, we've instanced it, we've done it again and again. So that's 4 of this exact same model. And I'm just distributing them around. But then what I want to do here is, I change it for the other model by doing a data swap with Control L. But you saw that the model immediately changed scale, and that's because, like I said earlier, I made that mistake where I scaled, which I shouldn't have done. My original instances, I should have all left at the same scale. That way I'd easily be able to just have my, like if I wanted to swap them around by doing a data swap, I'd easily be able to do that. But once I changed the scale, it sort of broke it, and it gave me trouble throughout the modeling process, which you'll see more in a minute. I know I'm rushing through it. I'm going through it very quickly, but yeah, I'm just trying to just show the process and quickly iterate like the things that I'm doing. And yeah, I'm using the calculator there, which is a good tip to just figure out the amount that I need to rotate by to get my panel appearing on each face of that ring. So basically I just divide 360 degrees by the number of faces on that ring, and then I know how many panels it should have and how much I need to rotate by. And there we go, I did another data swap, but again, immediately the scale just shrunk down and I had to like fix it, which you see me doing now, which is irritating because if I had left the scale the same for my original instances, like it would have been perfect. The scale would have been the same and I wouldn't have needed to change it at all. But yeah, because I made that mistake earlier, I had to fiddle with that, and it just gave me more hassle. So yeah, with your original instances, just keep all the object data, the scale, and everything the same, so you can easily like swap things around if you want. But yeah, it's yeah. Now I'm just duplicating stuff around, and again, like scaling things on the negative axis to like flip it to the other side of my ship, which is like sort of a method of mirroring. But the important thing, like I said earlier, is that to flip properly, you need to make sure your transforms are applied with Control A, and just apply your transforms. Then you'll be able to flip them over properly. See, I'm having a bit of trouble with it now. There we go, it's working. All right, and now I've properly flipped them all over. And now with this bit of one of the panels, I'm sort of creating a new bit of detail, which is sort of like a lateral thruster, which I'm going to put on the ship. Just a very simple little object that I'm recycling. And that's just what it is. It's like using simple shapes, recycling shapes to quickly create detail. It's nothing too complex. Keeping it fairly low poly as well, because it doesn't need to be high poly. Yeah, just distributing this around the surface of my ship, all these little thruster objects. Yeah, and throughout this modeling process, I also haven't really been worrying about like my topology, like n-gons and stuff, which are faces with more than 4 sides, which aren't really good practice in 3D. But it only really matters when you're using a subdivision modifier, which we're not. And it's just good to quickly model it rather than worrying about the topology. Like if you care about the topology, you should always do that last, because it just slows down the modeling process if you try to fix that stuff as you go. It's just very quickly to it's just much quicker to just throw your model together, and then like once you've got all your ideas, it's sort of like a rough sketch, and then you can fix your topology if you want. But we're not really going to need to fix anything because we don't really care about n-gons and stuff. It's just because we're not going to unwrap this or texture it or subdivide it, and it's not going to be animated either. So just a simple model for a small section of our render, and it doesn't need too much detail. So yeah, it's just learning where you need to put the detail, and learning when not to. I feel that's the hardest struggle for beginners. Is it's just you end up putting so much time into all the little things that you have control over, because then you feel like, oh, you've accomplished a lot, but then you end up just wasting a lot of time. And it's very easy to do, especially in a creative field like this where you're being creative. It's very hard to let go, and it's this weird thing where when you care less about the work, somehow you manage to produce a lot more a lot quicker. But yeah, it's just a very difficult thing, especially when you're starting out. So it comes with practice. But yeah, I'm not doing too complex stuff. I'm sorry if it's hard to follow. It is going very quickly. But like I said, I just wanted this to be a time lapse so that you could see my process rather than know exactly what I'm doing. And as you can see here, I'm just adding all the materials. Nothing too complex. I just added a metal material to one object and then linked the data with Control L, just so that I could select everything else and quickly add that material to all the other objects. And that way it was just an easy way to create a single material for my whole ship. And now I'm just like adding little details, like I'm adding new emission shaders and applying them to specific faces of some of my models, so that I can sort of have like lights on my model. There we go, I've added that second material, that yellow material, to that object, and now I've applied it to specific faces by pressing the assign button when in edit mode. So you see those assign buttons on the material panel. So yeah, and that's just how you assign different materials to specific faces on the model, which is very nice. And at a distance, it ends up looking pretty cool because you have all these little lights. It's very interesting. But yeah, it's up to you if you want to add that. You don't have to. I just thought it was cool. Alright, and that's the basis of our ship complete. If we look at this, we've got our shaders. I just added some simple shaders, and we've got all the models in just to create some detail, and that's as far as we're going to go with this, because it's only going to be a small element in our render. Probably went even more detailed than I needed to, but that's alright. It looks kind of interesting. Alright. The last thing we're going to do for this ship is actually the thrust. So we're going to have some flames coming out the back of these three main thrusters. So first I'll do the middle. So I'll just set my cursor with Shift S to this sort of thrust surface that I put the bright blue material on. And we're going to add another cylinder. So let's just put this up to 32 or something, which is the default usually. And then we'll rotate it on the X 90 degrees. Just scale it down until it's about the width of the exit hole of our thruster. Shift and Y to just scale it on the X and Z axis. There we go. And we'll get it to something like there. And we want to make sure the origin point or the center of the object is where the exit hole is. There we go. And that's basically where our flame is going to be. There we go. And we'll just add a new material now to that. And this is going to be a volume emission material. So let's remove our principled and add in an emission. Plug that into our volume. And then we're going to control where the flame appears with the gradient texture. So let's add in the gradient texture. Plug that into the strength. With our gradient texture selected, Control T to add in mapping and texture coordinate. And we're just going to quickly use this gradient texture to sort of create the flame coming out of our ship. So we can see it there. I'll just turn off my overlay. There it is. And we'll just set the gradient to quadratic sphere. And we'll also set the coordinate from generated to object. Alright, and that's already working for us. What that's doing is it's sort of creating an ellipse in the center of our cylinder. And that's great. So we've already sort of got our flame shape here. Now to rough that up a bit and sort of create individual flames, I'm going to add in a noise texture at the back here so that we can sort of warp it, and a color mix. So we'll get the color mix, then we'll plug our noise in the bottom slot, and then we can actually change the shape of our object. So try maybe the overlay blending mode. There we go. And you can see that's already working there. It's just cutting a bit off, changing the shape of it, and making it a bit rougher as opposed to the smooth sphere. Alright, so we can adjust settings, up the scale a little bit, up the detail. Alright, maybe increase the roughness a little bit. I think that will do. And then we can actually also come in here with a color ramp. So, and we'll see how that affects it. We can cut away. You can see that working. Let's just leave it like that because I think that's pretty good. And we'll also duplicate that color ramp so that we can bring it to the front here. And this will be our main area where we just change the levels. Alright, and if we get a multiply, just get an add node, a math add, change it to multiply. We can put up our strength, and we'll put it to something high like that. And then we'll just need to change the color because I want a blue color. There we go. And you can also change the actual shape of the flame inside the cylinder just by adjusting scale. So turning up the Z shortens it. Thin it out on these axes. I'll probably turn these to 0.9. Sure, sorry, 1.1 I mean. Just to thin it a little more. And then I'll turn this up to 1.2. There we go, because it's sort of being cut off by the edge of our cylinder there. So just to bring it inwards, I've just turned up the scale. Alright. And that's looking pretty cool. I'll also get a gradient texture. This time we'll just go linear. And this is how we're going to control the strength of our gradient. So Control T to add in the mapping. And we'll get a multiply, put it behind our main multiply. And we'll plug our new gradient into the bottom. Alright, now I'll just plug my gradient into the main strength, or even just the output, just to see what it's doing. And then we'll also add in a color ramp for that. Alright, got to make sure it's object as well. There we go. And yeah, it's cutting off half the object, so let's rotate it, because that's not the axis I want. Maybe 90 there, and then 90 on the X. Yeah, that looks like what I want. And then we can move it along the X, and if we turn on our overlay again, yeah, we can see where the edge of our cylinder is, and we just want to bring it just before that. There we go, that looks good. And then I'll probably go to ease just to smooth it out a little bit. And we want to make sure the brightest point of our gradient is basically where the exit hole starts. And there we go, that just allows us to taper it off. So we'll plug our main shader back in, plug the main multiply back in, and there we go. If we just mute that multiply that's adding on our whoops, we got to plug this in as well. There we go. If we just mute this, we'll see that we're just tapering off the end a little bit while still keeping the start bright. Now I can crank it a little further without it getting a little too crazy at the end. Alright, and that should about do it. So that looks like a flame. And we'll do the same thing for these two thrusters. So I'll just quickly do that. Moving it to the side and just making sure that our origin point stays in the middle. So that's why I'm in edit mode. Okay, just making sure it's the shape of the thruster. And I'll just give it the same material as this. Let me just name this thrust flame. Add that on. And the thing we've got to keep in mind is that the flame is actually going to appear where the object coordinate is. And that's where the origin is, because we're using, if we look at our shader, we've got the object texture coordinate plugged in. So that's why on this object where our origin is here, that's why our gradient sphere texture appears inside the sphere in the middle here. And the same is going to happen here, only the problem with this object is our origin is off center from the object. So I'm actually going to change that now. Go to object, set origin, set to geometry, and there we go. So now when we go into render view, we should see a flame appear. And it's probably not going to be exactly the right shape to begin with. So I'm probably going to make it a bit smaller by actually separating the material by creating a new instance. So click this 2 here, that way it separates it. And we can adjust the settings for this one individually. Alright. Actually add a mapping node to the noise with the same mapping, so object, and then I'll actually scale it in on a specific axis. Actually no, we can leave it as generated, that's fine. And we'll make them longer by scaling them in on one axis. Now that we've done that, we'll just grab our object here, and then we'll go to 3D cursor as the pivot point, because our 3D cursor is currently centered. And then we can Alt D to instance duplicate this, and then right click to let it go, and we'll just press S and X to scale on the X axis by -1. There we go. And now we'll see that that's pretty much duplicated it to the other side. And now I've got 3 main flames, which is pretty cool. I might actually scale this thruster up because it's a bit small. Alright, now, yeah, that's a bit bigger. I'll also shorten these two because I think the difference isn't big enough. There we go. Just to accentuate the middle one. Alright, and that will do. So we've got our flames now and our entire ship with its simple materials. So now we can pop it into our scene. So we'll just bring back the rest of our scene. So I'll just set my other side to a viewport. And then we can get our ship collection here. And we actually haven't put our objects inside that collection yet, which was a bit of a mistake on my part, so my bad. But we'll just select all our stuff now. So click the top one and then scroll all the way down, find the bottom one, shift left click, and that's selected everything in between. And we'll drag that into our ship collection. There we go. And now we've got this nice tidy collection, and we'll stick that in our scene collection here. There we go. And it's disappeared because our scene is currently hidden at the moment, so we'll just bring that back. And now I've got our ship with the rest of our scene, which is great. But the problem is we actually have to scale our ship down because it's too big. So let's do that now. Just open our ship and select everything. And we want to make sure we're going off median point. Alright, scaling it down. Something very small. There we go, that should do. And now we'll come to our left side, press 0 on the numpad to go to our camera view. And we can see it in our view there. And I'm actually going to have it somewhere in the bottom right corner here. So let's just move that on the y-axis, move it closer to the camera, and then let's actually move it over to this side. And I'm also going to rotate it. We'll sort of have it pointing upwards and at an angle toward the inside of the frame. And if we just turn off our overlay, there we go, now we can see what it looks like. So I think I need to have it a bit more upturned. And I'll also rotate it on the z-axis just to straighten it. There we go. Alright. Maybe bring it a little closer to the camera. And now we'll just test what a render looks like. Alright. Oh, sorry. My other sun, which I added before when we were making the ship, we got to delete that because that's ruining the lighting of our scene. So let me just quickly delete that. There we go. And then we can select our ship again. Alright, now the other problem I've noticed is that our volumes are very dark now, and that's because we've scaled them down. So because the volumes are smaller, there's less space to emit from. So we'll just increase the amount for those multipliers now. So it needs to be fairly bright. And we'll do the same for our middle one. Let's go something like 2000. Just until you're happy with it, because I wanted them to be fairly intense. There we go. Alright, let's go back to our 3D viewport. And I'll jump out of render view for this side and then go back into render view for this side. And I'll actually use Control B to just select a part of my viewport. That way we only render that part. There we go. Just to speed things up. Alright, I'll just select my ship again and we'll finalize the positioning of our ship. Alright, and with that done, I think I'm going to do a render now. Let me just Control B and select outside my camera view. That way we reselect our whole view again. There we go. Now I'll first just go over the render settings. So I'll just quickly optimize some stuff. So with the emission, we'll probably need some volume paths. So we'll put that up to 5. And then we'll set our total to something like 9. I'll have 9 transparency. That way we have plenty of transparency so we don't get any problems with our layers like our atmosphere or clouds. And then transmission can be 5. Glossy can be 4. Diffuse we'll turn down to 3 because we don't need too many of them. And we'll set our render samples to 1024. I can of course do test renders at lower samples, but we'll do a final render at 1024 samples. And we'll turn on adaptive, turn the minimum to 64, threshold to 0.5, and then turn off Core 6 because we don't need that and that creates more noise. And then we'll just click persistent images, use spatial splits just to increase our speed of rendering. And I'll just set my tile size to 400 because I'm using a GPU. They tend to work better with larger tile sizes. And got to make sure your GPU compute if you've got a fast graphics card. So that's what I've got. And then that should be just about it. We don't need to change the other settings. But I will just quickly check a couple of things. So we'll go down to scene and we've got a few checkboxes here. So I'm going to just turn on denoising data. I'm going to turn on mist, and then I'm going to add in object index. So we just need to go back to our asteroids, and we need to just turn up our go to the object tab for each one. We'll go to relations, and then we've got pass index, and I'll just turn that up to 1 for each of my asteroids. And this is basically for when we go into compositing, because that's where we're going to add in the light shaft effect for all our asteroids. So we'll just grab each one, turn it up to 1, and there we go. So we'll just hide the asteroids again. Alright. So we go to our scene. Yep, we've got our object index checked. So we'll be able to mask out our asteroids when adding in the light shafts. And that's great. Now we also checked on the mist pass, and that is for adding in the mist of our asteroids. So we'll just go to the camera. We'll come down to viewport display. We'll turn on mist, and that's given us a line. Now what we want to do here is go back to scene. Actually, no, we want to go to world, and then we've got mist pass here. We drop that down, and we can adjust the start and end distances of our mist. So I'll make my mist start pretty much where the camera starts, and then I'll just lower the depth to something like that. Alright, that should be good. And now we can hit F12 to render. I'll be back. And we're back. We've got our finished scene now, fully rendered. All our asteroids and our planet and our ship is looking pretty cool, but there's still some things we can do to push it further. Like the main effect we want is to have a bit of a glare on the ship so that the thrusters sort of have these streaks coming across the screen. And the other effect we want is to have the light shafts of the asteroid so it appears to have mist, and that's why we added the mist pass earlier. Alright, so let's just pull that aside, bring back our main window, and I'll make this a compositor. We'll just get rid of this viewport. There we go. Compositor. Great. And we'll click the use nodes checkbox. Then we get these two nodes. Alright, so we've got our nodes. First we want to just add in a viewer. So we'll get an output viewer. I'll just delete the composite for now. We'll add that in later. We want to add that in when we finish our compositing so that we can save our final image out. But we're just going to use the viewer for now. Right, so I'll plug in the viewer. We want to also go to this side panel here. If you don't know how to open that, it's N. Press N to open it. And then go to view. Click backdrop. And you can adjust the size of the backdrop. Alright, so we've got our two nodes now. And the first thing we want to do is just add in a denoiser node. So go to filter, denoise, pop that in. And we'll also get our denoise data, which is why we checked on this denoising data checkbox. We'll get our albedo and our normal. And then we'll have a smoother image now, which is great. So it's denoised. Now I'm going to add in the glares, which are going to make our ship look really cool. So add in a filter glare. And this time we'll start with the fog glow. And that will add in a really cool glow effect. We'll just lower it a little bit by turning it into the negative of the mix. Yeah, there we go. That's looking cool. We'll duplicate the glare, put it in front, and this time we'll turn it to streaks. Turn the streaks to 2. So we want it to go across the screen. And there we go. That's looking cool. We'll turn up the iterations to 5 as well. That way we get smoother streaks. And then I'll just adjust my fade, maybe turn it up a little bit to lengthen the streaks. And I'll lower the mix a little more with this one so that they're not as strong. There we go. That's looking kind of cool. Alright, so I think we'll just take a look at this, and yeah, I think that's what I'm going to go with. Alright, so the last thing we want to do is add the light shafts to our asteroids, and this is going to be a cool effect. It's a bit complex, so I'll go through it now. Let's get right into it. So we're going to start off with a streaks node. And the reason we want to do that is because I'm going to use the streaks to sort of simulate the effect of the light shafts on the asteroids. And this is where our mist comes in. So I'm going to add in a color mix node. Put that there. And the bottom slot of our mix is going to be the color of our mist. So I'm going to set it to like a blue color. And then for the factor, we need our mist pass, which we set up earlier. So that's created a mist socket here on our layer. Put that into the factor, and we'll see that we have some mist. There we go. But it's covering the whole scene, and I don't want that. I actually want my mist only to cover where the asteroids are, which is the top left region of the screen. So I'm going to add in a multiply to our factor, change that math to multiply, and I'm going to multiply by a actual mask. So we're going to go to matte, get a box mask, sorry, get our box mask, put it here, plug it into the bottom of our multiply, and then we'll see our box mask just here, and it's actually a bit small, so let's change the size of it, just max that out, there we go, and make it a bit taller, and then we'll rotate it, make sure it follows our asteroids, and we'll move it up. Something like that looks pretty good. And now I'll get a filter blur, put that in front of the mask, change it to fast Gaussian, set it to relative, and set it to 20% blur. And we'll see how that looks. Alright, and now we have this sort of blurred effect where we only have our mist on the left and it tapers off. Actually might turn up the blur a little more. Alright, so we want to put a multiply at the front of our factor just so that we can affect the strength of our overall mist. And there we go. Now you can turn this to whatever level you want. We'll leave it strong for now so that we can see what we're doing, but we'll turn it down later. So now we want our main image, which is here, to be in this top slot. This streaks is what's going to create our light shafts. So what we want to do is actually, let me just pull all this over because we're going to need more room. Pull that over there. And we're going to use our mask for our streaks. So let's get in a converter ID mask and get our object index. This is why we set our object indexes of our asteroids earlier. Because when we set this to 1, which is what all our asteroids are, we put that in our output, we can see our asteroids have a value of 1 or white. Only see our asteroid mask here. So, and that's really cool because that is basically where we're going to add in our streaks. Alright, so we'll just plug our main image back in. Then I'll just get a color mix node, put it in front of our streaks and set it to value. And then I'm going to actually get my image and put it in the bottom slot and make sure the top slot is just black. And now if I put my mask in the factor, we'll see what that's doing. Plug it into the output. There we go. And so now we can see that we're masking out everything but our asteroids, which is really nice. So when we add the streaks, we'll only see our asteroids. Alright, I'll just set the settings of my glare node now. So two really important things. I want the mix to be at +1, and I want the threshold to be at 0. That way we get everything. And we only see the streaks and not the main image. And there we go. Now you can see, we see all the streaks being created from our asteroids. I'll turn up my fade as well to lengthen the streaks. There we go. And this will be the basis for our volumetric rays. So let's add in a subtract node in this factor here. So I'll duplicate my multiply, put it behind, and change this one to subtract. Now the important thing with subtract is we want the clamp to be on. That way we don't get values below 0, because pixels with values below 0 look strange, and we don't want that. So we'll plug in the glare, and you'll see that it actually subtracts. Oops, let me just get my main image back in. And then I'll just add in a multiply here so that we strengthen the rays that we're subtracting over here. And yeah, you can see the result here. We're sort of eliminating those streaks being created from the bright sides of the asteroids, and it's sort of just removing it from the mist. But it's not done yet. It's not facing the right direction. So the other important setting we want is to set the streaks to 1, because we only want one streak going in one direction. We don't want the streaks going in 2 directions. And now we'll just check our angle. Put that up. And our problem has occurred, as I thought. If we look at our image, we can see that our streaks are facing the opposite direction from what they should. So our light is coming from this side of the image and pointing this way. So our rays should be on the dark sides of our asteroids where they're in shadow. But they're actually on the light side. They're on where the bright area is, which isn't what we want. But the problem is our angle offset only goes from 0 to 180 degrees, which means to get them where we want, we need to go higher than that. And it's not actually possible on the glare node. So there is a way around it, and I'll go through that now. So what we want to do is actually flip our image. So I'll add in a distort scale node, and I'll flip my mask by setting this to -1. Set the Y to -1, and we'll see that that's actually flipped our mask. When we plug that in to the viewer, it will see our asteroids are now on the bottom. We want to also duplicate that node and put it here before the value. And then we'll also get this and plug it into our main mix node here at the end. And then we'll see when we plug in our end that our image is flipped. And now it should be able to work with the direction of our streaks. So we'll just adjust the angle. And there we go. You can see because the light side's now up here, we can point the streaks downwards. So we'll just get it to the right direction. We'll just tweak it. It'll take a little bit. Okay, that will do. Now I'll also get my mist pass because I think that needs to be flipped as well. Oh, whoops. No, I guess it doesn't. So I'll mute that. Alright. So, yeah, I've realized to fix it, so we just need to reflip our image because it's still getting the mist from up here. So if we just duplicate this, put it in front, we want it along the line that goes to our mix node. And then that will reflip the image. And then we also want to reflip our streaks. So we'll put that here after our streaks. And basically what that has done is it's first started by flipping the image so that we could get the image reversed into the direction that we could use the angle of our streaks in. And then we've flipped our image back now with our correctly pointed streaks. And so now you can see the result is an image where our streaks are now in the right direction. So that's great. It's just that flip effect where you start flipping just before and then you reflip back just allows you to sort of switch the direction of your streaks. Alright, so with that set up, we can adjust the settings. So I'll turn down this multiply. That way our shadows aren't as strong. And I'll also turn down my mist overall. Alright, something like that. And then I'll just turn up my multiply down here so that we strengthen the shadows a little more. They're a little weak at the moment. Just tweak them till you're happy with them. There we go. And I think the angle's a little bit wrong, so I'll just adjust it a little. There we go. I think that's better. Alright. And I'll also just blur it, so because my streaks are a little bit strong, I think. So we'll just add in a filter blur, set it to fast Gaussian relative, and we'll set it to maybe 3%. See how that looks. Oh, a bit much. Yeah, you got to tweak it till you find what you think looks good. All right, just to soften it up a little bit, soften up the lines. And I'll also increase my multiply a little more because I think it needs it. And that has created the effect of having all these little light shafts without actually using any physical volumetrics, which is very noisy. We've done it perfectly smoothly using the mist pass and this cool little hack with the streaks node. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. But yeah, that's the final image. I'll just plug that into the output composite. There we go, that way our final saved image is composited. There we go. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I really enjoyed making it. It was fun making this scene. It incorporated a lot of different stuff, like making the asteroids with the particle system, some modeling where we made the ship, the lighting, and also just some compositing where we created that little hack of making the volumetric effect of our asteroids. So yeah, if you enjoyed it, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps me out. And, you know, maybe go check out my Twitter. I've got links down in the description. Yeah, Let me know what you guys create and what you might want me to make in the future. All right, guys. Bye.